Hi everybody. Well, one of you asked me a very interesting question. They said, can we ask you questions? And since I don't know what questions you have, I thought that was a fabulous idea. So thank you very much. And so right now I'm going to start answering the first batch of questions that were sent to me. These are true tales of my African adventures. May this inspire you, deter you, caution you, and above all, entertain you. What was the moment you were the most afraid for your life and that of another? Well, let me start with the moments of my fear. I must tell you, first of all, that there have been many times when I was in grave danger and felt no fear. And that is pretty common for me. I feel absolutely nothing. Even when I've faced people with weapons, I, for some reason, feel no fear. But there are times when I have felt fear, and it has been intense. And the one time I'm going to describe, it was so intense, I don't think there are words in the English language or any language, perhaps maybe Sanskrit, which could adequately describe my fear. So the first one is when I was walking near the Kruger National Park. Now, Kruger National Park is a massive game reserve, and it's got the big five. It's full of wildlife. It is teeming with animals, and it's if you like wildlife and the bush, it is truly a sight to behold. Well worth visiting. So just outside the Kruger Park, there's a place where we were directed to go and look for mambas. They said there are so many mambas there, and we needed a few. And we thought if we could catch them rather quickly, that would be nice. So off we went to this place, and it was at the Orpen, O-R-P-E-N, Orpen Gate entrance to the Kruger National Park. And we parked our vehicle and proceeded into the bush. Now, the grass was very long. It was in places head height. But the average grass length was around knee height. And so we proceeded through the grass, and what the plan was is to go to these thickets. They were mostly acacia trees with other trees, a mix of trees, and there were great thickets of these trees. There were great thickets. And what would happen is when it was hot, like it was then, around about 35 to 38 Celsius, mambas would go under these thickets and curl up in a very nice, quiet, cool spot on the leaf litter. And then when we walked in quietly and slowly, we would scan the scene under the canopy, and it was very dark when you went in because outside was extremely bright. So when you moved into the canopy, there was this shade and it looked very dark, and so it took a little while for the eyes to adjust. Now, if there was a mamba, the mamba would see us and then wake up. They don't sleep in the true sense of the word because they can't close their eyes, but their minds seem to switch off and they have a sort of a sleepy rest. If there's movement, they catch the movement and then they would start to move off. And that's when we would run in last few meters and put a grab stick on it and then do the capture. So I was with my brother, and my brother was going about 100 meters from me, from thicket to thicket. I chose a huge thicket, and I went for that. So when I reached the thicket, I brushed the leaves aside and walked in very quietly. It was very dark, and I went in about 5, 6, 7 paces, and all of a sudden there was movement. Now, as my eyes were becoming accustomed to the light, it looked like there were some big logs, quite a few big logs fair distance from me, and these logs were on the leaf litter. And so I was looking at them, and then this movement, and I became confused because I couldn't quite make out what the movement was. And these logs, 9 of them, 10 of them, I never had the opportunity to count, started moving. And then I became really confused because they still looked like logs in the dim light, but they were moving. And then all of a sudden they rose and turned, and I was facing a pride of lions. Now, I subsequently found out that there are sometimes more lions outside of the Kruger National Park at Orpen Gate than in the park. These lions were resting in the midday sun, and they did not like the intrusion. They may or may not have been hungry, but I think the heat of the midday sun possibly saved my life. They turned and they came at me, and when I realized they were lions, a sudden fear overcame me, and it was a deep, primeval, primordial fear which went right down into my belly, and my stomach felt it was going to drop out, and I went into a cold sweat and my eyes started watering, and I became paralyzed, and they rushed at me. And you know, lions are big. A big male lion is enormous, and this was a big black-maned male lion, and he was coming straight at me at speed, kicking up leaves and dust. The females were following him. They were right next to him on his flanks. And I instantly understood that I was about to be killed. And I don't know if any of you have been in that position where you know you're about to be killed. Not just killed, but torn apart, with these huge, big yellow teeth in these massive, powerful jaws which would clamp down on your neck, your arms, your legs, and then they'd pull in all directions, and they would literally tear your limbs off. And they kill you. And that's what I was expecting to happen to me right then. And I even feel the fear in my stomach when I speak about it. And then this male was coming directly at me, and he dropped to the ground about 3 meters away. That's like 9 feet, 10 feet. I could virtually touch him. And he looked up at me. I think it's because I did not run that they stopped. You have to say, I think, because nobody can be sure. There are lots of experts who will tell you, oh no, they did this because of that. But no, you're never 100% sure when it comes to animals. So it looked up at me, and then it opened its mouth, and look at a lion snarl. Google it, see lions snarl while they're looking at you. And his teeth were exposed, his gums were exposed, and he let out this unearthly, deep, guttural roar, which sounded like very much louder than any V8 engine you've ever heard. And he kept out letting go a series of these roars at me, and they're designed to cause fear. And let me tell you, they do just that. The females were doing the same thing. Also now went to the ground in a crouching position, all looking up at me, all snarling and all growling. A more horrifying sight you could never dream of coming across and witnessing. Not in your wildest dreams. I have tried to describe the fear that was running through my mind and how my body was reacting as it was releasing material from my bowels and so on. My bowels were being emptied from all sides. Fight or flight syndrome. And I was paralyzed. And this fear was so exquisitely intense. It was like a see-through wave of electricity running through my body, causing my mind to melt. I can never describe how intense that fear was. And then I got this idea when as soon as my mind actually could function, just for a brief bit, and these things happen in bites of seconds, I started to walk backwards. So the first couple of steps I took, the lions moved forward towards me. And I kept going. I just kept walking backwards and backwards and backwards. And then they seemed to understand that I was leaving. And they seemed to think that I was not really worth pursuing at that point for some reason. Perhaps they were full, I don't know. So I kept walking until I felt branches, low-hanging branches, brush against the back of my head, and I kept going backwards and backwards. Now, let me tell you an interesting thing. My senses were so acutely aware of what was going on that I could see behind me. And I'm not joking. I was avoiding an antbear hole, an anthill, a log, a stone, and walking between the grass. I could see without seeing. I knew where I was going, walking backwards. It is a very interesting phenomenon, and it exists. I did it. And I kept walking backwards. And I walked backwards for about 100 meters, about 300 foot, without turning to look behind me. And on my way in, there were numerous holes and rocks and termite hills, etc. And I didn't so much as bump into one on my way backwards for those 300 odd feet. And I found myself in a position where my body had calmed down sufficiently for me to actually attempt running. So I thought this would be a good time. Turned around and I ran with all my might until I got back to the road and to our vehicle, and then started shouting and whistling for my brother. And he appeared out of the grass, and I told him to keep away. I shouted at him to keep away from that thicket and come back to the vehicle. And when he got back, we got into the driver's and passenger seat, and I sat down, and I was speechless for quite a time after that. I could not speak. Hey, by the way, I do have Patreon, so you can join me there too.